Welcome back. So I want to talk to you today about Aeroplan and Air Canada and the deal that is tentatively going through. Wanted to give you a bit of backstory because a lot of people, believe it or not, maybe not believe it or not, maybe you're a person that didn't know that Air Canada is A, not owned by the government anymore, or B, and I go A and then B. So is B also doesn't own its loyalty program, which is called Aeroplan. That is until probably this fall, where the deal looks like to have been approved. It just needs to go through a shareholder vote. So, what happened? Why did this go down? And what's kind of the underlying themes? And what does it mean for you? So, Air Canada, in the years that followed 9/11, was struggling to maintain profit. They had merged with Canadian Airlines. They inherited a lot of costs. They inherited a lot of staff that were expensive, and combine that with new travel regulations, the new reality of flying and traveling in a post 9/11 world, and also looking at fuel prices. Fuel shot up, and some people, I say more and more people attribute to the climate of the world at that point, and the spike in oil being one of the things that hit airlines hard across the board. Now, we get to a situation where, as I mentioned, Air Canada wasn't doing that well, so they needed to find out, or not find out, but they needed to find a way to stay afloat. They didn't want to bankrupt themselves. That was a real possibility. They had multiple votes with their employees about trying to save the company from bankruptcy. One of the things I know that when I started work at Air Canada back in 2005, what had happened was that I kind of the shocking reality that at the end of each shift, if I was working a part-time shift, I'd have to give 15 minutes of my time for free and work for free for 15 minutes. If you worked a full-time shift, I believe it was half an hour. I think that's what it was, half an hour after an 8-hour shift. And that was one of the things that the employees for the airports, passenger handling, had agreed to in order to help the airline stay afloat. There are also concessions made across the board, and times were tough. And the CEO and the board of directors and all that at the time, we were trying to just keep Air Canada afloat. Some say that the CEO was trying to smoothen out his job and justify bonuses that he was getting by spinning off and creating subsidiaries within Air Canada, Aeroplan being one of them in 2002. And then finally, Aeroplan got sold to a group called Group Aeroplan. It was an entity formed within Aeroplan that just kind of lived on its own. And the whole deal here was Air Canada was just trying to make money for the short term. Now, when this happened, I remember thinking that it was absolutely ridiculous. It was one of the things that really shouldn't, and airlines should have control of their loyalty program, but hey, they needed the money, or they wanted the money, and they didn't apparently see the value in Aeroplan as large as they sold it for. Whereas, Group Aeroplan did really well for themselves in the years that followed. Aeroplan had great growth. And I ended up working at Aeroplan. As I mentioned, Air Canada and Aeroplan, they split off. And in some weird way, I still to this day, don't know the full details of it, but Air Canada was loaning staff out to Aeroplan, and Aeroplan needed the extra staff. And I ended up working at Aeroplan as an Air Canada employee, and then eventually, without going into my life story, ended up as an Aeroplan employee when Air Canada and Aeroplan finally severed all ties, internally at least. They had severed ties publicly, but internally, like sharing of employees and stuff like that. That was one of the things that you had to choose who you're going to be with: an Aeroplan employee or an Air Canada employee on layoff. As a student at the time, I was like, I got to go where the money is. Anyway, so when that happened, Aeroplan really took off. They started making a lot of money, and looking at how much money Aeroplan was generating, it kind of like you looked at Air Canada and be like, what were you doing? Like, why would you do that? But it happened, and then as time went on, Group Aeroplan became Aimia, which is the company it is now. Aimia has invested in a lot of loyalty programs and loyalty marketing firms across the world. So looking at it too, and one of the things that I was always saying was that Air Canada should just buy back Aeroplan. I thought it was going to happen. I'm kind of, I'm happy to see that I was right, but at the same time, it's looking at, kind of a weird transition that we're going to be having from being an Aeroplan member to still being an Aeroplan member, but now with Air Canada again in an official capacity, not having Aeroplan manage Air Canada's frequent flyer program. So little details here and there that are a bit weird, but why does this happen and how did it happen? Well, Air Canada, I know behind the scenes there was a lot of tension between Air Canada employees, and this is management employees, as well as Aeroplan employees. So Air Canada, Aeroplan, they would continuously get together for these overarching campaigns, meetings, whether it was promotions or whether it was the nuances of managing the frequent flyer program. And I speak on this on a personal level because I was involved in some of those meetings. So as I mentioned, Aeroplan managed Air Canada's frequent flyers. So the top members, or top customers rather, of Air Canada. And when I say top customers, I do mean like the ones who earn and spend the most and earn Air Canada the most revenue. If you're a frequent flyer and you fly on Air Canada planes, you are giving Air Canada a lot of money. And Air Canada wants to do certain things to either, spice up and attract new customers, attract new frequent flyers, or reward frequent flyers through, certain features and upgrades that would be available. And when I say upgrades, I'm not necessarily talking about free upgrades. That's, obviously something that frequent flyers do look for. But I'm talking about like enhancements to the user experience when going on to the altitude websites and stuff like that. So during these types of meetings, you have Aeroplan, which is, being paid to manage these clients, but then you have Air Canada coming at you from a, experience management or things that they want to do. And then Aeroplan kind of holding the card saying, no, we're not doing that because they're entitled to. They're their own entity. They have agreements which they are fulfilling, but to go above and beyond is not something that Aeroplan in most cases would have wanted to do if it was going to cost them a lot of money. And from a business standpoint, you kind of understand that. Not that I agree. I do think that you got to keep your best customers happy, even if they aren't your best customers. They're still the people that are going to be using your program to the benefit of others, and there's still positive behaviors to be reinforced by having somebody collect Aeroplan miles, even if the majority of that is on Air Canada flights or just Star Alliance flights. So that kind of caused a lot of friction when they couldn't see eye to eye, especially when trying to manage the altitude program. Definitely Air Canada held all the cards on what they wanted to do. Aeroplan didn't come to the table and say, oh, we want you to do this with altitude, but they did say, oh, well, we're not going to do this on the Aeroplan site. We might not have a single sign-on. We might not have this. And that's where you had Aeroplan that launched its Distinction loyalty program thing, which cleared the waters as great as like throwing mud and then shaking up all the dirt everywhere. It just became this weird situation where you had Air Canada, had, that it itself is Aeroplan being its loyalty program, to then having Aeroplan, and then you had the Altitude, which was Air Canada's frequent flyer statuses. So, you could be whatever levels. In the old scheme, it was Prestige, Elite, Super Elite, and then they changed it with the Altitude. And then you had Aeroplan launching their Distinction, D Silver, and I think it was D Gold and D Diamond, which, so then you got, it's confusing. It's kind of ridiculous at the same time, but, Aeroplan wanted to do something on their own, and they're within their rights, but that kind of pisses Air Canada off, and Air Canada's like, well, why do we have to go through them? Let's just, wait it out, wait till the contract is up in 2019, 2020, and just launch our own frequent flyer program. And that's what they did. They announced that. They said, we're going to be launching our own frequent flyer program. And then what happens is that you have Aimia's stocks take a nosedive. So now all of a sudden, Aeroplan really isn't that valuable long term. They are not going to be, too expensive to acquire, which is if, Air Canada did want to buy Aeroplan, let's say 5 years ago, it would have cost them billions, perhaps, more than that. You look at how successful they were, and they're firing on all cylinders. Sure, there was some devaluation. Sure, Aeroplan members weren't thrilled with, it costing more miles to fly somewhere and to redeem those miles. But by and large, from my experiences, Aeroplan was still one of the best bangs for your buck. Well, Air Canada kind of put the kibosh on that. They devalued Air Canada a significant amount. Air Canada devalued Aeroplan a significant amount. And from there, now it's like all of a sudden a lot easier to acquire Aeroplan. And sure enough, that's what they did. Aeroplan was, trying to be bought out by Air Canada and a CIBC partnership, I think with a few other little partners. What happens is that the offer gets rejected. A few months ago, it was announced the offer gets rejected. And what does Aeroplan or Aimia do? They go and they sign partnerships with Air Transat, which is one of Air Canada's big competitors for overseas flights to Europe or to the Caribbean. And then they and then they sign a deal with Porter Airlines. So short haul flights, especially like Montreal, Toronto, Toronto, Ottawa, Toronto, Halifax, Toronto, Boston, Air Canada has a lot of clients that fly those airlines. Well, what if all of a sudden now you can accumulate Aeroplan miles on Porter? Well, suddenly Air Canada is in a position where, well, look, they're signing these deals with our competition for these key regions. Is this going to be way more expensive to try to fight than just pay more money? So that's what happened. Air Canada comes back with another bid with some partners to buy Aeroplan. And it looks like as of 2 days ago, it's going to go through, again, pending a vote from the shareholders or stakeholders or whatever, shareholders. And from there, it looks like Aeroplan will be reintegrated back into Air Canada, which I think is where it belongs. However, there's kind of now a situation where does this leave, flight redemptions? Will the program get further devalued? I obviously don't have those answers, but I am cautiously optimistic. I am a big proponent for Air Canada. A lot of people like to give me flack on a lot of videos saying, hey, I like Air Canada. I'm not a big fan of a lot of other airlines, but Air Canada, having worked there, sure, there are some companies or some employees who they need to disappear. They're not great employees, but there are a lot of people that care. There are a lot of hardworking employees. And the method to the madness is there with a lot of things that Air Canada does. You got to remember, they're an airline that is in the business of not only transporting people, but making money. And you can't transport people if you're not generating a revenue. So I'm liking the fact that I don't need to spend all my miles ASAP anymore, because I was going to get rid of them in the next few months. I'm happy that I still have those miles, and I am looking forward to seeing what happens next. I am going to definitely be keeping a close eye on this, because this is something that's an interesting development, not only for Canadian Aeroplan members or Canadians. It's really a worldwide thing. Air Canada is, one of the pioneers. They are the pioneer of loyalty. Aeroplan was a revolutionary product when it came out. It was a great company. Definitely, they've been through a tumultuous last year, 2 years, but it's gonna be good. I am hoping the devaluations don't hit, but I would like to know what your opinion is on the situation. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think of Aeroplan getting reintegrated with Air Canada? And let me know what you plan on doing with those miles. All right, until next time, safe travels.